So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Mass Effect. So let's start the series. Conan was bleeding from her right side as she hobbled through a forest. She was probably struck by a flying kunai, based on the shape and extent of the wound. But she didn't understand where it came from or why she was here at all. She was aware that she was experiencing amnesia. It was impossible for it not to be. Not only was her lip bleeding, but she also had other black and bluish bruises on her body, along with scrapes on her arms and legs, all of which she didn't have time to check. Her body's opposition at the thought of movement was all she needed to know they were there. Although she might not have recalled how she got there, the evidence indicated that she had just been in a life-or-death struggle and nearly lost. At this moment, it is irrelevant. I had to get to Amigacure as quickly as possible. But if I don't find a safe spot to rest soon, I won't be able to make it in my current state, she told herself. Although it would be better if she could locate a civilian cottage in this remote area, based on the current situation. That had very little chance of happening. If she hoped to get the wound healed, she would likely have to make do with a shaded area beneath the enormous tree's roots. Fortunately, she would be able to halt the bleeding with her paper long enough to bandage and sew up the incision. Even if it was a disagreeable method, Jiraiya refused to accept that their education would only involve fighting. Since being able to fight for their own survival meant little if they couldn't heal themselves after a conflict, basic first aid was also taught to them. But just as she was ready to pause and do so, she heard the rustle of leaves. And the giggling of kids who had no idea what was in the forest. Additionally, it sounded as though it was approaching her from the left side. Even then, she wasn't certain those were actual sounds, and she had to pause to make sure she wasn't getting a fever from an infection. She could have been infected from head to toe and her opponent was on the verge of killing her. She had made 3 unsuccessful attempts to disperse the forest, so it was definitely not a genjutsu. It had satisfied at least 4 of her 5 senses, so if it was a genjutsu, it was an extremely good one. There was a slight scent of dampness in the air, almost like the forest had recently had rain. It would have been strange if she had bothered to taste a leaf or something. Together with the fact that she was a skilled sensor-type ninja, she had no genuine reason to think this was a genjutsu. Using Tsukimi to create a genjutsu this good would have been extremely tough for even Itachi, and that was saying something. She ignored such thoughts and went to the left, moving slowly toward the sounds. Ninjas were known to use their own children as bait, so she wasn't sure if she was falling into a trap. Although they were typically unintentional distractions for her targets, Heaven is aware that Conan employed other people's children for the same ends during missions. In a matter of seconds, a tiny group of 5 children, most likely no older than 7, appeared. Despite the fact that the majority of them appeared to be from locations like the Hidden Leaf or the Hidden Stone Village, one child had the dark skin that most Kyomonin had, suggesting that she must have been from the Hidden Cloud Village. This suggested that they were of different nations. They must have found her coat odd since they recognized her right away, and they felt the same way. Seeing kids from such diverse backgrounds come together was almost unheard of in the ninja community. And refraining from taking part in their own country's competition. She had already lost a lot of blood attempting to escape, so she lacked the stamina to be astonished by this sight. Fortunately, someone quickly saw that her side was gushing. A red-haired boy said, miss? Are you okay?" And Conan didn't answer. Could she? He was speaking a completely different language than she did, so she couldn't comprehend a word he said. What was that he just said? I was unable to. I couldn't understand any of it, she noted, choosing to try her hand at speaking. Perhaps one of the children in their group would comprehend her words. It was worthwhile to try. The youngsters gave her a lot of perplexed looks as she requested in her native Japanese, "Do you children live somewhere nearby? Please, I need a place to rest, maybe even get this stab wound looked at." They had no idea what she may have meant or even what language she had just spoken in, because they had grown up in an English-speaking colony in an era when auto-translators were common and learning a second human language was not necessary. But before the red-headed man could say another word, Conan passed out. She had lost a lot of blood, and she probably would have died in this strange place if she hadn't been lucky enough to find herself at the edge of the trees, close to the route that led straight to the Eden Prime spaceport. In any case, the children hurried to their teacher, who was in charge of the field trip to the woods, and informed her of what they had witnessed. Themis, Arcturus Station. The Arcturus Stream, 4:45 p.m., Eastern Standard Time, January 17, 2183, about 3 days prior to Shepard's mission. As he flipped through the papers for the umpteenth time that evening, Udina complained to himself, At the time, he was meeting with Captain Anderson and Admiral Hackett to determine who should be nominated for Spectre evaluations. The number of possible Spectres candidates was literally in the thousands. All of them were outstanding troops in their own right, and several of the individuals on the list had at least an N4 commendation. They had decided that they only wanted the best to represent humanity in the Spectres, and at the meeting they had weeded out over half of the names on the list. Therefore, he was only considering individuals who had been given the N7 commendation at this time. The issue was that at least 36 individuals were still on the list, and it's possible that they were all the greatest fighters humanity has to offer. There could only be one, and they had to make a decision right away to avoid damaging the beacon they had discovered. What about Shepard? Udina inquired, thinking that by putting forward his name, this protracted discussion would finally come to a conclusion. Anderson gave them some background information about her, saying, Commander Elizabeth Shepard, born on the SSV Gibraltar and grew up living on starships with her mother, her father having died during the First Contact War when she was just 3 years old. Since Shepard was one of the most stunning troops he had seen in a long time, he was really relieved that Udina had brought her up. She was also involved in the events on Aqueous. Saw her whole unit get wiped out by Thresher Maws. Somehow, in a manner she has so far declined to mention to therapists and even her superiors, she managed to survive. I don't know what she saw there, or what she had to do to survive, but it clearly wasn't pretty. She has to be suffering some serious emotional trauma. Hackett continued. Anderson acknowledged, but refused to back down, claiming, every soldier has scars, Shepard's a survivor. She knows what it's like to be to hell and back, and you know that's something the Spectres need in agents. He believed that she was the only one who could actually complete the task and move humanity closer to a council seat. Luckily for him, Hackett was already inclined to agree. In a somewhat feeble challenge, Udina questioned, Is that really someone we want to protect the galaxy, Captain? What else was new, even if he didn't believe in Commander Shepard? Anderson looked directly into the ambassador's eyes and said, Udina. In practically every government, politicians were notorious for causing misunderstandings, therefore he needed to make sure his message was understood. That is the only kind of person that can protect the galaxy. We've all known that since ancient times, just on a much smaller scale than galactic proportions. If you want to try and put a greenhorn straight out of the Academy into the Spectres, be my guest. But you better be ready to hear the answer, no, a lot. For what felt like an eternity, but was really only a minute or two, there was stillness. "All right, Anderson, you win. I'll make the call." "Let's hope Shepard is as good as you say she is," Udina said with a final sigh of despair. After more than 3 hours had been clocked into the meeting, it was adjourned. To be honest, Udina was happy that Shepard had been selected, if only to be able to leave the chamber where one of his least favorite persons in the world was kept. To put Shepard in the spotlight, he had to use some of the favors he had accumulated over the years by becoming close to some of the people in charge of the Citadel and the Systems Alliance, but any cost to keep Anderson safe from Shepard was money well spent. The idea was to keep him accessible so that he wouldn't be inaccessible when he required Anderson's resources. Eden Prime, New Washington Hospital, 8 a.m., European Standard Time, January 14, 2183. Dr. Yoshida spoke to his colleague, "Hello Dr. Grayson, how's our newest patient doing today?" in reference to Conan. Being the surgeon who operated on her, he had not heard anything about her condition getting better despite the fact that her very peculiar attire had drawn the notice of several other staff members and even ER patients. Even though he was able to stabilize her enough to move her to a more laid-back area of the hospital. He wanted to know. His last name certainly gave away that he was of Japanese ancestry. He also had to endure the drawn-out and agonizing process of learning his native tongue in addition to English and a few other languages because his parents were more traditional than others. Other than when he sought for the emergency surgeon position here, he didn't talk about it very often. His parents weren't proven wrong, and he had been taught that learning a second or even a third language would greatly improve his chances of landing a job. Nevertheless, learning many languages in the civilian sector became increasingly difficult with the introduction of autotranslators. With a tone that suggested it wasn't necessarily an option for him, Grayson responded, "You might just want to go check yourself. I've heard from people there that they had to chain her to the bed because she tried to make a run for it when she woke up. On the upside, she seems to be recovering quickly." He was somewhat aware of Yoshida's multilingualism and sincerely thought he could help her relax. When he last saw the patient, she appeared much like a cornered animal, with the exception that she appeared to have far more experience in that field than others. He hurried to the room number that he indicated on the paper and spoke to Dr. Grahan. "Yeah, in that case I might see you on lunch break, Brian." A patient who felt like a confined animal was the one thing they didn't need. The hospital room of Conan. "This room is too sterile and white." While lying in bed in the pajama-like garments she had woken up in, Conan sulked in silence, "And the worst part of it is, I can't even leave." She was arrested because she wandered off into the hallway, even though she knew she was in a hospital and that no one could understand her language. It irritated her, especially because all she wanted was her origami flower and her Akatsuki cloak back. If not to wear, at least to keep close by so she could be sure they weren't taken. It wasn't being questioned that the bloom could be replaced. She only had to collect her chakra, shape some paper out of her surroundings, and fold it into a flower. But replacing the robe wasn't so simple, particularly because she wasn't a very skilled seamstress. She could repair tears or holes, but she couldn't create a brand new robe from the ground up. Furthermore, that specific robe held sentimental significance as a memory of the time when Yahiko and Nagato were still living. A little while later, a doctor wearing light blue clothes entered the room, grinning broadly as he looked at the clipboard on the desk next to him. She was honestly growing accustomed to the fact that no one here would be able to relate to her, and it was obvious that this man was here to see how she was doing. Although she didn't enjoy it, she was growing accustomed to it. In what appeared to be his native tongue, he asked, "So, how are you doing today?" Conan could not understand him and simply blinked in disbelief. In reply, she said in her mother tongue, "Why do I even bother talking to you people? You wouldn't understand what I have to say anyway." Yoshida recognized the language she had just spoken as Japanese after blinking a few times. He surprised her by saying, "I don't know, maybe because you're hoping someone will," while grinning once more. Finally, someone who can actually speak something sensible. She breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Could you please release me from the chains, please? Before I have to break them off." "Are you going to run off if I do?" Yoshida asked, laughing at the idea. "Not if I get my clothes and flour back I want." After considering it for a time, Yoshida agreed, "I don't see the harm. You're lucky that your costume had an easy way to get you out of it, otherwise I'd have had to cut you out of it. You do know that the right side is pretty much soaked in blood though, right? You did lose quite a bit. I've been through worse, doctor, believe me. A little blood on my clothes won't stop me from getting it clean and patched up again." He called someone on an odd, flashing orange device on his arm and said, in submission, "If you say so." To be honest, she was interested by it because she had never seen anything like it. If that was jutsu at all, she had never seen it like that. Not only that, but Yoshida caught her glancing at the device right away, indicating that she was paying attention to it. She had never seen an Omni tool before, judging by the expression in her eyes, which was. To be honest, it was strange. Everybody in the cosmos had seen at least one Omni tool and knew what it was. Curious that she was looking at his Omni tool, he informed Conan, "Your stuff is on its way here." Luckily, he didn't have to wait long to discuss that topic. Inquiring as to whether it was a ninja tool or a jutsu, as she had assumed, she inquired, "What kind of jutsu did you just use to talk with the man on the other end of the conversation you just had?" The doctor was taken aback by the query since he had never seen the word jutsu, which means art, used in such a manner. He said, "Jutsu," in an attempt to clarify his own uncertainty, which also perplexed Conan. When he simply gave her a perplexed look, she became even more perplexed and questioned, "Is it a ninja tool then?" "No, in fact I'm not sure what you mean by that, it's just a tool, nothing else." "What do you mean by ninja tool?" Dr. Yoshida's medical office was a disorganized space with papers scattered around, a few touch pads on the desk, and an extranet terminal that he used to compose reports. The doctor seemed to enjoy his office's disorganized appearance, and he was surprised to discover that, despite some of the papers having been there for a few months, he knew where they were all. If he had been inspired, he would have cleaned up the mess. In addition to lacking motivation, he was presently composing a patient report for Conan, as she had mentioned. He was looking for the woman's records at the same time, but he had not yet located anything. If she had given me her last name, it would have been simpler, but when I asked, she simply remained silent. If she doesn't tell me anything, how can I determine what allergies she might have? As he continued his patient report that evening, he reminded himself for the third time. According to the report on the patient, Conan, File 1. We had a patient at New Washington Hospital yesterday evening, Earth Standard Time, who appeared to be in her mid-30s and had Japanese ancestry. Her right side, just below her ribs, had sustained a nasty-looking knife wound. We have not yet been told what caused it. It was bad enough to require immediate medical attention, including 20 cubic centimeters of antibiotics and an emergency liver procedure to keep the knife wound from completely rupturing. After the procedure, we gave her the usual dose of Medagel and put her under anesthesia so that her body could repair itself. She woke up at least 6 hours ahead of schedule and even tried to move about without any help from staff, even though she was supposed to wake up at least 12 p.m. on the following Earth Day. The odd thing was that, according to reports, she appeared to have been walking comfortably enough that no help would have been needed. There might have even been an altercation that left multiple people hurt if there hadn't been a staff member who knew some broken Japanese. After approximately 10 minutes of questioning, I learned the patient's name is Conan, which is an odd name for a woman, but I still maintained my professionalism. She says that, Amigakure no Sato, the village hidden by rain, is where she's from. I guess that's a fitting name, because when I looked it up on the extranet using a variety of search engines, both artificial and otherwise, I got nothing. Naturally, I haven't told her yet because I'm not sure how she would react. Since she was unable to explain why she received the knife wound or the other cuts and bruises on her body, I believe she is experiencing amnesia. In addition, she has demonstrated interest in and a total disregard for Omni tools and other medical supplies other than a scalpel and other fundamental first aid supplies. Her carelessness with the tool is not explained by a more severe form of amnesia, which I find difficult to accept. She didn't demonstrate any muscle memory in our first lesson, which would have helped with the re-education process. Additionally, based on her responses to my questions about human history, it appears that she would not only have terrible amnesia, but that it would be so severe that it would have created new memories in her head. The human mind isn't designed that way, so no head trauma could result in something this comprehensive. Take my statements with a grain of salt, though, as I am by no means an authority on neurological sciences. Her knowledge of human history has even been put to the test, and it appears that this memory implantation extends even farther than I first believed, all the way down to her learning processes. She even believed that we had not only gone through a Third World War, but were now engaged in a fourth. Even events such as World War II were not immune to criticism. Maybe I'm misinterpreting things, and she's just afflicted with dementia. I'll have to watch for any other symptoms. Yoshida Doctor. After writing up his report, Yoshida eventually returned to Conan's room and saw him doing some light cardiovascular exercises, such as one-arm push-ups. Every time she performed a push-up, her mumbling sounded like she was in her 200s. As if the fact that she had already completed more than 200 push-ups wasn't enough of a clue, most civilians couldn't or wouldn't do more than 24 in an hour, let alone climb into triple digits. She was moving at a steady pace that screamed of prior military training. Being the person she was, she naturally made no attempt to recognize Dr. Yoshida's return, but he knew she was well aware of his presence in the room. Despite not displaying any indication that she was paying attention, she simply seemed to carry herself in that manner, taking in every aspect and performing calculations. But it had not yet been decided for what reason. She did, however, appear to have some military training, even though her behavior deviated slightly from that. She was terrifying for someone so attractive, yet she didn't have the same air of authority as soldiers. Yoshida was more focused on her wound mending than on her attractiveness, thus it didn't really matter to him. Knowing she wouldn't stop that easy, he remarked nicely, "Isn't this a bit much for only a day into recovery?" But that wasn't the issue. He was curious about how she was mending so quickly, and he suspected that she was aware of the factors that contributed to her own faster recovery. After checking her side before choosing to begin this warm-up exercise, she said in a neutral tone, "Maybe. I'm not sure how you treated my wound, but it seems like it already healed up." Before attempting anything physically demanding or attempting to manage her chakras, she had made the decision to awaken her muscles. She had already determined at this point that she was no longer in the ninja nations, and based on the complete lack of chakra in everyone she had met thus far. Only a few explanations were provided. She was in a place where the Sage of Six Paths and the 10 Tails had no impact of any kind, which is quite implausible given that a man who spoke her language was standing directly in front of her. Or B. She had somehow gotten away into a completely different universe. She could only think of a handful of ways, persons, that this could have happened if option B was the case. But she wasn't going to worry about it just yet. Not much time would have been lost away from Nagato and Yahiko's grave, after all, for she could always return to her own reality a few seconds after leaving. In an attempt to elicit information from her, he probed, saying, it just doesn't seem natural to me that you're up and at it so quickly after nearly dying out there. Just seems too convenient. Even though she was a ninja and they were skilled at deceit, Conan was already sick of this word game before it had even begun. She got up from her sit-ups to have a meaningful talk, saying simply, "You want to know the secrets of how I recovered so quickly, correct?" without even waiting for Yoshida's response. It would be a long one, Kami knew. To be frank, I am just as surprised as you are that I'm on my feet so soon. Normally, I would need to be resting for at least a whole 3 days for a wound that's serious, so long as I got it sewed up quickly enough. If I didn't, I could kiss a full week goodbye, praying to Kami that I didn't get an infection along the way. That still doesn't answer how you've generated new cells so quickly. Yoshida commented, and Conan responded, "I took some time to observe you and your staff members here at the clinic, whenever you were watching over me. From my understanding, you people seem to have an astounding lack of chakra, which would be lethal where I come from." He waved her words aside and sneered, "Chakra? Really now, how can the teachings of some old yoga instructor really be the source of your healing powers?" She responded curtly, her eyes blazing at his comments, "Would you like me to prove it? Because it would be as easy as breathing for me to show you just how much chakra can actually do." She was obviously not amused, but she was more than happy to demonstrate its presence. "Look, I didn't mean to offend you. I just mean that you shouldn't put your faith into something that doesn't have concrete evidence." He muttered, raising his arms in surrender after deciding it wasn't a good idea to agitate a patient. She repeated, annoyed at what she saw as the man's lack of courage, "Do you want me to prove it or not?" She was therefore not really shocked when he merely nodded in agreement after letting out a defeated sigh. That was all she needed, and in a matter of seconds, she transformed herself into roughly 100,000 sheets of paper. She then swiftly folded them into origami butterflies, which flew past the doctor and out the window. It was everything she had not to giggle when she saw his stunned expression, which was so precious. She undoubtedly had one of the greatest poker faces in the world, but no one could tell. Naturally, Dr. Yoshida was finding it difficult to accept what he had just witnessed. After practically transforming herself into paper, his patient soared by him to the window. How would you explain that? Something like that would be impossible for even biotics to do. This implied that she wasn't hallucinating and that what she had stated was probably accurate. However, what might that signify? Was she a human being, or was she a mutation? Or was there another factor at play here? His last chance had actually flown out the window, therefore it was quite doubtful that he would ever find out what it was. I suppose that's the price I pay for being a skeptic. It was hard for Shepard to believe. She was informed that she had been chosen to serve on board the Normandy, the galaxy's first stealth frigate, just 2 days ago. She didn't express her joy because she was a woman who was quite used to controlling her emotions. However, the appropriate individuals would be able to identify her immediately. However, they would have suffered greatly if they had confronted her about it. Naturally, Caden picked this up quickly, which helped him when they both found out they would be serving beside each other aboard the starship. Despite their short acquaintance, Caden was a clever man. Given how lethal Shepard can be, he quickly picked up on the redhead's somewhat erratic yet sardonic nature, which is a survival skill. The brass who briefed her on her assignment knew that this was just a shakedown run, but she had other ideas. Regardless of how sophisticated the ship was, Eden Prime was one of their best defended colonies. Unless the mission is critical, you don't send one of the Alliance's top Demolisher-class engineers. Additionally, she almost ran over Nihilus, the Turian Spectre, at every bend on the ship. It is utterly insane that Spectres did not merely tag along on shakedown runs. Something was going on, something the Council desired. They wouldn't have sent someone so significant to Nihilus if the Council had only been monitoring their investment. In addition, why does that Turian appear almost everywhere I look? Yes, I am aware of my amazing looks, but wow. With a secret laugh at her own joke, she thought, that's really creepy. She certainly thought well of her appearance, but she wasn't arrogant about it either. Joker interrupted her thoughts by mentioning that drift was less than 1500K and checking off online and green systems. Talk about the devil, too. As if immediately behind her, the Turian said simply, 1500 is good. Your captain will be pleased. When Nihilus was out of earshot, the Joker joked, I hate that guy, and he left, much to Shepard's relief. From the council next him, Alenko questioned, he gave you a compliment. So, you hate him? He was obviously competent to understand the true meaning of the system's reports, since he had been examining them with Joker. He responded sarcastically, but he was very serious about not trusting Spectres. You remember to zip up your jumpsuit this morning? That's good, I just got us halfway across the galaxy and hit a target the size of a pinhead, so that's incredible. Besides, I don't trust Spectres. Too much black ink for the work they do. Call me paranoid. Shepard believed that his paranoia was well-founded. The Council has a right to send anyone they want to keep an eye on their investment. Joker. If they want to waste the money by sending one of their top agents, then fine by me. Shepard made a joke that made people like the Joker laugh. Alright ladies, shouldn't you be more focused on flying this ship as opposed to gossiping on what the cool kids did last Saturday? It's funny, because he didn't usually enjoy being ridiculed. Caden smirked and said, right, sorry about that, Commander. He was fully aware that Shepard was feeling quite upbeat. Given that Shepard had survived the atrocities of Accuse, he didn't want to interfere with it. To be honest, nobody wanted to know how she did it. No one smart, at least. A voice that was all too familiar said, Joker. Status report, over the comm. Joker warned his commanding officer, only to hear the voice of the man he really didn't want to hear. We're 15 minutes out, Captain, nothing else to report. Better brace yourself, sir, Nihilus is headed your way. Over the radio, the Turian remarked, duly noted, Mr. Moreau. The pilot shook his head and muttered something like, too late, damn. Tell Shepard to meet us in the comm room. And find a comm Bowie while you're at it. I want mission reports ready to be sent the moment we leave Eden Prime. In a feigned despair, Joker answered, aye. He turned to face the commander and continued, well. You know what you gotta do. Ever hear of the phrase, subtle like a nuke, Joker? Oh ha ha, very funny. Now just go do what you were told before I break my arm on you. She quipped, wouldn't that be fun? Next you'll want to get to know me better. She didn't let him finish the joke because she was a competitive person. However, it was all fun and games because she had already met the Joker while attending military school on Elysium. He was one of the friendliest, least cheerful-looking, and generally unpopular children she had ever known. Since she was preparing to become a combat engineer and medic and he was training to become a pilot, she naturally didn't see him very much. Jeff was aware that they both obviously had great success in life. When she thinks about it, she kind of wishes she had met the Joker back then. However, he had virtually eliminated that possibility, but what were you to do? When she finally entered the comm room, she discovered that her stalker was the only person there after passing Presley, who was talking to Adams down in engineering, and momentarily soothing an agitated Jenkins who was babbling away with Chuckwas about specters and the task they were on. She didn't even act as though she was unaware of this truth. He didn't either. With an unsurprising lack of expression, he said, "Commander Shepard. I was hoping you'd get here first. It will give us a chance to talk." She chose to bite since she was at a loss for words. "What about?" she inquired, having a vague notion of how this discussion would proceed. In her life, she had encountered a few Turians, and the ones she had encountered were essentially bookish men. "I'm interested in this world we're going to, Eden Prime. I've heard it's quite beautiful." She surprised the Turian by joking, "Looking for a vacation home? I don't think they import any dextroamino-based food." He hadn't gotten used to Joker yet, and he wasn't used to anyone else but Joker making a joke without even warning him, especially in such a serious setting. If he would do it at all. "Sorry, not funny, I know. I wouldn't know honestly, I've never been to Eden Prime. But you've at least heard of it." Nyla suspected, "Eden Prime is a bit of a symbol to your people, isn't it? You're proof to us that you can not only establish colonies, but also protect them. But how safe is it really, Shepard?" She was growing weary of this word game and asked quite firmly, "Something I should know, Spectre. Your people are still newcomers, Shepard. The galaxy can be a very dangerous place. Is the Alliance truly ready for this? Are they ready to be a bigger part?" Anderson entered just as Shepard was about to respond, making the redhead keep her mouth shut. Without saying hello or anything, he said bluntly, "I think it's about time we tell the commander what's really going on." Before the Turian could even say anything, Shepard responded, "Let me guess, this is more than some simple shakedown run." This was a small act of juvenile revenge against the Spectre for making her play that word game of his. Nihilus calmly said, "Correct." He didn't even mind that she had interrupted him. Instead of being chosen for the Spectres because she was courteous, it was because she was talented. "We're making a covert pickup on Eden Prime. That's why we needed the stealth systems operational," Anderson clarified. "What's the package, Cap?" "Recently, a research team on the surface unearthed some kind of beacon during excavation. It was Prothean." "What are the details?" "This is Big Shepard. The last time we found Prothean tech, it jumped our technology forward by 200 years. However, Eden Prime just lacks the proper facilities to study the artifact, so we're taking it somewhere else for proper study," Nihilus said, closely observing the commander to gauge her response. "Obviously, this goes beyond mere human interests, Commander. This discovery could affect every species in Council space." Not truly thinking that he particularly cared about turning anyone into a Spectre at the moment, she said sarcastically, "Well then, glad you're aboard Nihilus. We could use the extra help, and who knows, you might even be here to see if someone is Spectre material." To the commander's surprise, Nihilus laughed and said, "Oh, the irony in that statement. You're kidding." "I don't joke, Commander. Not with something so important." She looked at Anderson again and he interrupted, "There's something else, Shepard, other than being made a candidate for the Spectres." "I'm listening," he added cryptically, letting her stand in confusion for a moment before continuing. "According to our intel, there's a woman planetside who's quite possibly from a whole different universe. We need you to secure her as well. We've gotten a tip-off that we've come across something else. Something that might change the way we understand the laws of our universe, and beyond." Captain Dash. He interrupted her by pointing to the holograms behind her, which immediately aired a video from the dossier folder that had been included as evidence of the spook's assertions. "Now isn't the time for jokes, Commander." A woman with blue hair stood in it, wearing a black cloak with red clouds sewed on in an uneven pattern, a single piercing in her lower lip, what appeared to be a white rose in her hair, and almost impossibly bright iridides. Shepard looked in disbelief as this woman vanished into a flurry of paper in a matter of seconds. To make matters worse, the paper began to fly around in a way that seemed almost sentient. It must have been some film magic on the part of the recorder because it seemed insane. She had never seen anything like it before and inquired in confusion, how could that even be possible? "Captain, that can't possibly be real. Someone has got to be making a movie for some old and forgotten TV show from 100 years ago. I want to believe that too, Shepard, really. But Intel has been running it through every last test they can to see if they can find any form of editing. So far, they've found nothing." Shepard truly did want to quarrel. Biologics wasn't enough for her to come up with an explanation for why something like that might occur. None of the powers bestowed by that energy, according to her research, were nearly as capable of microcontrol. It was simply nonsensical. Finding this woman is a secondary objective, Commander. The beacon is top priority. Anderson said, at last, after an awkward moment of quiet, to get things going again. "Captain. We have a problem. The Utopia System in Eden Prime Hospital in New Washington, 3:03 p.m. Standard Time on Earth, January 20th, 2183, the cafeteria." A few days previously, Conan had visited a spot that, to be honest, he had never gone to before. The only establishments in Amigacure were barracks and a sporadic eatery that catered exclusively to locals. She was there because she took the decision to reward herself for all of her hard work with a large bowl of ramen noodles and rice balls prepared in her native way. Okay. Nearly. To be honest, it was very different from what she remembered, with a variety of extra ingredients. Dr. Yoshida had to explain that the new plants were a part of Eden Prime's original environment, which is where they were reportedly located, even though she wasn't familiar with some of them. She didn't care that they were supposedly healthful and helpful to a patient who was recuperating. It was ramen, and it was delicious ramen, and the rice balls went well with it. She had a very straightforward purpose for returning to this damned institution. She knew no other Japanese speakers, and while they could understand her, thanks to their auto-translators, she was unable to understand them because she lacked a device that connected her to the translation software and lacked the necessary knowledge to understand what they were saying. Even before running away, the first time, she was aware of this, and the only reason she did so was to reprimand the doctor who seemed to be in charge of her health. In any case, he was becoming obviously overconfident and needed it. However, her problems didn't stop there either. With all this sophisticated equipment that hardly required a prompt to turn on and off, the Omni tool being the biggest offender in that regard, she realized she was totally out of her league. Trial and error would not enough, she needed to know how to operate in this new environment. Not unless she was interested in becoming a prostitute, which she found abhorrent. Everything went to bad after that. She was nearly unable to process the speed at which a bunch of metallic creatures suddenly rushed in, brandishing what appeared to her to be crossbows without strings to draw the bolt back. Fortunately, she was able to quickly hide under cover and reach safety. However, most of the employees and patients there couldn't say the same. In fact, she saw Yoshida, who lacked her quick responses, bleed death next to her in a comparatively short amount of time. She muttered, "Shit," and looked up to see the creatures simply killing the surviving one by one. She obviously did not approve of this. Being a ninja could have involved killing, but she was willing to take the chance if she could stop it. While she first asked the excellent doctor if he used translators himself while he was outside Alliance space, or whatever that meant, he pointed out that he did, and she removed the necklace he wore around his neck. She obviously didn't comprehend the bizarre, static-like noises these monsters were making, but that was to be expected. Author's note, I couldn't think of anything better. Okay. The creatures appeared to already be aware that none of the survivors understood what they were saying and were unconcerned. She finally attacked after finding the waiting to be about enough. It wasn't dramatic or instantaneous because her initial action was to change into paper airplanes and fly into position as the monsters stared at her almost inquisitively. If only they were aware of the peril they were facing. She destroyed the entire bunch in a matter of seconds by sprinkling them with paper kunai and pressing the razor-sharp sheets into their mechanical limbs and chests. She started dissecting the monster in the best condition right away, not even bothering to glance at the humans who were still alive in the room. Given that she was a ninja and that ninjas always need to learn more about what they are dealing with, this was a very smart habit to have. The sooner they learned about it, the better, as it ultimately saved lives. In light of this, she learned a great deal about their physiology, that they didn't actually have one. They were essentially a machine that relied only on an unidentified energy source, at least to her. She did, however, discover that she could kill the head considerably more quickly if she cut the connections that led to it. Having said so, she concluded that because the machines were no longer needed for the bodies, it would be wise to turn them into paper for her own use. She would have to utilize that skill sparingly because it would use up a tiny but visible amount of her chakra. Behind her, a woman who appeared to be a nurse based on her attire stammered, What were those things?" Conan decided to leave the hospital and face the creatures, and he only shrugged in response. Better yet, she could see that the nurse was as afraid of her as the machines. But she turned to face the survivors before departing, saying, "It would probably be smart to hide. The enemy may not know you're here." The hospital was completely overrun with these things, who had somehow worked out how their buddies perished, so today was not a good day after leaving the cafeteria. Which Conan found quite strange, and when she attempted the same technique, it almost cost her life. She came to the realization that these objects could all be under the influence of the same entity, which would get more intelligent as a result of each of their friends' deaths. This meant she had to be inventive in how she killed her victim and keep them from realizing that paper was what killed them. She would therefore need to be more inventive in how she killed her opponents because she couldn't use it solely as a weapon of mass destruction. Shepard's perspective. Earth Standard Time, 3:45 p.m. Officially, it was. It was a terrible day today. Shepard considered it much less personal than the fact that one of the most successful colonies on Earth was sacked in such a manner. The fact that Jenkins was now lying dead with holes all over his chest and a Swiss cheese appearance was the cherry on top. Even worse, she essentially sent Jenkins going into his death even though she knew something wasn't right. They wouldn't have been taken off guard like that if they had had firearms on hand the entire time. You could tell by the way Caden was acting at the moment that he was having a difficult time. In order to give the impression that the deceased were simply sleeping, he took the time to close Jenkins' eyes for him. After getting to his feet, he told Shepard the obvious, ripped right through his shields. He didn't stand a chance. However, Shepard was not in the mood for sarcasm. Shepard was his commanding officer, and Jenkins was a friend of both of them. We'll make sure he gets a proper burial once the mission's over, but we need to stay focused. In order to get some real retribution against whoever caused this disaster, they both took out their firearms. Because they had been trained as engineers and sentinels, respectively, they were both using pistols. It didn't take long because more of those flying, dumb turrets appeared after a little stroll through the forests. Perhaps they weren't so foolish after all, as the scouts made sure to remain in cover and suppress the fire. If things continued that way, someone would become exactly like Jenkins, which she did not want to happen again. She therefore determined that it was necessary to throw a frisbee-shaped grenade quickly, positioned it directly behind the gullible scouts, and then detonated them, scattering red-hot scrap all over the place. She didn't realize her arm was bleeding until they were clear, at which point she had to apply a small bit of medical to close the cut. She would have had to dig the darn thing out, which was never a very nice experience out on the field, but fortunately it was only a gunshot wound and the round went straight through. She continued with the rest of her unit as adrenaline and medication kicked in, only to discover a soldier running for her life and shooting as much as she did. With just 3 shots overall, she eliminated 2 obnoxious drones, demonstrating her decent shooting skills. However, it became evident at that point exactly what the heck they were fighting for. They were engaged in combat with the Geth, and the Geth weren't content to simply shoot people in the head. She was immediately reminded of Vlad the Impaler and the Forest of Death because, for whatever reason, they were impaling people on spikes. Was it aesthetically pleasing? Of course not. Entrails were seen down several of the spikes. She wasn't eager to find out if it was correct, and it most likely smelled awful as well. The Geth were shooting at her, though, so she didn't need to worry about that at the moment. There would be absolutely no breaks today, that much was certain. This was only the Normandy's maiden mission, and it was going to be a long and difficult day. She had a feeling that missions like these would be frequent and that she would have to use everything she owned to survive. It was merely an estimate. Earthly hell. Shepard would tell her and her team, which included herself, Caden Alenko, and their newest member, Ashley Williams, that was how the last 30 minutes had gone. This was a decent second-place runner-up, albeit perhaps not as awful as Accuse. It wasn't the overwhelming volume of Geth they were up against, or Jenkins' death. No, it wasn't the case. The reason for this was that she was unable to move more than 2 paces away from the rock she was hiding behind without being hit by a barrage of bullets the size of grain. 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and a solid 15 minutes of shooting flashlight heads until there was nothing left to shoot at was the main theme of today's mission. Granted, she discovered that you could kill any specific Geth with a single shot if you merely aimed at its neck. The issue was that they realized they already knew, and they didn't give them much of an opportunity to do so. Consequently, she was unable to utilize her excess on them. Or sabotage. Yes, it was the best day ever. Furthermore, they received yet another unpleasant little surprise when they eventually got a break. It turns out that the individuals who were impaled on the spikes, the ones Caden had hypothesized were being employed for psychological warfare, were still alive. To be honest, that was certainly a contributing factor. And no one to please. They were essentially wild creatures capable of overloading shields with electrical pulses, therefore something must have happened to sap their humanity. And after that, they would begin beating a person's body with their recently acquired metal arms until they were dead. Had Caden not killed the beast by impaling it with his Omniblade, Ashley would have had to learn this lesson the hard way. She gasped from the adrenaline rush, trying to forget that she was only fighting for her life. "Thanks, Lieutenant. Thought I was a goner there for sure," she said. It seemed that the shockwave had a horrible habit of causing limited paralysis, which made it more difficult to resist them. Shepard noted, consciously stating the obvious, "There's practically nothing left of them. Almost like they are husks of their former selves." She was referring to the animals as husks in a very subtle way because of how little of them were left after being released on humans. Both the staff lieutenant and the gunnery chief were aware of this. Alenko called her out on it, saying, "We're calling them husks now, huh?" Simply nodding, Shepard remarked, "Unless you got a better idea." He didn't, and he had no intention of acting as though he did. All he wanted to do was get out of here, get to the spaceport, and meet Nihilus the way they were meant to. In any case, there appeared to be no survivors and no hostiles in the area. They were hidden away, if there were survivors. This was advantageous. They had to remain in that position as well, in case hostiles were observing their squad's activities and discovered any survivors they came across. They did proceed, and two things occurred as they reached the summit of the hill they were climbing. The first thing they heard was a lone shot in the distance, coming from the direction of the spaceport they were going to. It sounded like a pistol, low caliber, and from where they were, it was probably nothing to be concerned about. The second thing they noticed was a massive, crustacean-like ship that took off from the surface. It was most likely a dreadnought class. Who knew how anything like that could make it through re-entry, land on a planet's surface, and then take off again? Its takeoff was so loud that it was difficult to think, let alone hear the gunfire coming from the spaceport's direction. As she shoved Ashley and Caden into hiding, Shepard thought, OSH*T, more geth. And husks. Another party to crash, huh? The POV of Conan. At 4:10 p.m. Earth time, Conan was also having a rough day. She had been bumping into those machines from earlier almost wherever she walked for the last hour. They were shooting anything that even moved as they absolutely swarmed the farms and streets. They were all shooting at moving paper with a particular zeal, so based on what she could see, they must have been thinking the same thing. They were paranoid, and they didn't pretend otherwise. It could be taken advantage of. In order to divert attention, she chose to utilize her paper clone jutsu. She sent the clone fleeing to the right, which allowed her to get away while they destroyed the paper decoy by shooting it to shreds. She didn't want to give them away that she could employ decoys, so she killed them when they shot the clone down. She wanted readers to believe that the paper was the source of the issues rather than that it was being controlled by someone. Even if they did reach that conclusion, she wanted them to believe that the issue had been resolved and that they had finally relaxed, which would have made it simpler for her to go past the machines without being noticed. After all, They wouldn't imagine that the now inert paper would begin to cause issues in such a scenario. As it happens, she was partially correct. They continued shooting at arbitrary stacks of paper, but each time they waited a short while to see if the paper would move, and they always did. As a result, she had to exercise extra caution when the machines approached, which was nothing new to her. She had previously concealed herself from enemies who were much more astute, but these machines were unrelenting. She was still creeping along what she thought were railroad tracks when she noticed something she had never seen before: two metal, bird-like things talking to each other. The farthest being asked her translator, "This isn't your mission, Saren, what are you doing here?" In a tone that was obviously indicative of the respect a pupil has for his guru. But as might be expected from a sentient race she had never seen before, their body language was odd. She was completely unsurprised because she couldn't comprehend the toads when Jiraiya or Naruto summoned them. This Saren put his hand, if it was one, on his apparent comrade's shoulder and walked past him, out of her line of sight, saying, "The council thought you could use some help on this one. I didn't expect the Geth to be here. The situation is pretty bad. Therefore, it is their name. I'd better remember that," she said to herself, combining the word with a picture of the machines she had battled. In a tone that was somewhat menacing and set off alarms in her mind, Saren reassured his colleague, "Don't worry." Despite her lack of trust in both of them, this Saren reminded her too much of Toby, and as it happened, Toby was a very cunning man. He shot his friend in the back of the head with what seemed like a scaled-down version of the stringless crossbow she had seen these Geth employing, concluding, "I've got it under control." She was reminded of her previous experiences going undercover to kill those who were harmful to Amigakure because the other being never even suspected anything before he died. But this was just plain unjust. The dead creature never even had a chance to make the connection, so at least her targets had an opportunity to fight back once they realized her true purpose. She couldn't just barge in with mindless anger, though. She would have to approach this strategically if she were to take action, which required mental clarity. Power alone was not a ninja's strength, rather, it was their ability to use that power effectively. No ninja was one to lecture about justice, and this Saren's recent behavior mirrored the ninja world's attitude in many respects. He had done nothing wrong in all rights. Unless you get caught red-handed, purple-handed. These creatures apparently bled violet instead of the customary red. Fantastic. Now that she was at ease, she took out a paper kunai and changed the tool's very interior to include an explosive tag that would explode in 3 seconds, much like a grenade. In order to make the projectile weapon worthless in a battle, the explosion would only serve as a distraction if this Saren turned out to be more skilled than the Geth. She would then utilize her jutsu to close the distance. She then hurled the kunai, bringing it within inches of Saren's foot and instantly grabbing his attention. He must have realized that the harmless paper missile was far more dangerous than it appeared to be, and he hurled himself out of the way before it could detonate. He's intelligent, then. She concluded, this battle will be a lot longer than I dared hope then. She swung the weapon out of the foreign creature's hand, which admittedly felt extremely metallic, and darted towards her opponent with amazing speed. Given that she had just a few seconds after the kunai detonated and had the gall to engage him in hand-to-hand fighting, he was obviously taken aback by how quickly the onslaught had come. It was then her turn to be startled when she was abruptly flung backward from an unidentified source, slamming with a hard thud into the metal plate wall behind her. After that, she started seeing stars, but she was able to escape being struck by that attack a second time. Since her opponent was glowing purple, she could only presume that he had attacked using some type of unidentified ninjutsu. However, she was also unable to identify any chakra within him. What was happening? He had taken up his weapon while she was stunned and was elevating it in her direction, so she had to prevent him from taking it again to use it against her. But there was no time to worry about such things. She had no idea how such a thing could result in quick death with little more than a hole in the head, but she most definitely didn't want to find out. In order to either shear right through the weapon or at least knock it out of her opponent's hand once more, she aimed for it while throwing the paper shuriken. By throwing it far enough this time that he couldn't sprint for it and not expect to be punished with shuriken in his back, she was able to achieve the later outcome. He abandoned the weapon at that moment and turned his attention to the chakra-less jutsu he had been practicing before, hurling luminous blue spheres in her direction, some of which attempted to follow her as she ducked. With the intention of causing some harm to what she hoped was her opponent's kidney, or his species equivalent of that organ, she closed the distance and rammed her knee into Saren's stomach in retaliation. She didn't, but since she still achieved the desired results, she didn't need to know that. She had the upper hand in the combat until the Geth chose to support Saren, shooting at her indiscriminately and forced her to hide behind the boxes once more. She could only concentrate about survival because Saren was obviously fleeing, going in the direction she had just come from. After a while, the vibrations of the metal projectile striking the crates behind her ceased, and the noises produced by the firing weapons increased exponentially in volume. Was followed by an otherworldly screech that was so loud that it almost drowned out her own thoughts. However, it didn't last long, and she was able to return her attention to the now distracted Geth, who were shooting at civilians. Who were firing at these after firing back themselves. Blue moving corpses, that is. She could identify what she saw later, killing the machines came first. It's likely that a member of that crew was aware of Saren's identity and his purpose. She chose not to take the chance since she was unaware of the possible threat posed by these new hostiles. Concentrating on the apparently resurrected bodies, she usually targeted the head, driving a kunai into the skulls of 3 before the others removed the others, quickly tearing through the Geth's shields. Knowing that the crew would probably have questions for her, she chose to wait there because she had nothing else to do. She had some for them, Cammy knew. After praising her efforts, the lady in the front began, "Impressive work. I can hardly believe you took out those Geth with just throwing knives. I'm Commander Elizabeth Shepard, of the SSV Normandy. We've been looking for you." "Conan, right?" she said. Conan's eyes narrowed to indicate her mistrust as she asked, "How do you know my name?" It makes sense considering her current circumstances, where she is only aware of a small portion of the technology's capabilities. With little else to say, she said simply, "The Alliance got a tip-off from a reliable source. This operation had a remarkably low level of information, and they had no idea who she was." Shepard needed to exercise caution because he only had a dim idea of Conan's actual potential. "From what I understand, you're a bit of a special case, no memory of how you got to Eden Prime, but you know how to do something that no normal human can manage." Indeed, Conan readily identified the source of this information and understood what she meant. However, she was skeptical that the armored woman would find any significance in the name. "I see. Dr. Yoshida seems to have been too chatty outside of my presence." "Who's that?" the group's male member inquired, his eyes displaying sincere interest. The other woman gave her a suspicious look, and the other members of the squad mirrored that expression in various ways. She was dressed really oddly compared to other folks, so she couldn't blame her. However, she didn't think of herself as a civilian. Some man that healed me when I was found wounded here on Eden Prime, as you call this place. No one that you need concern yourself with, after all he is dead. The other woman's suspicious expression intensified as she questioned accusingly, so you killed him? After turning to face her, Conan gave a bland response, no, I simply couldn't save him. Pointing to Nilas's body, she continued, just like I couldn't save, whatever that is. She didn't really care that Nilas was a Turian, and she didn't even know it. The only thing she knew was that it was beginning to smell. As she knelt down to examine Nilas's body and noted the bullet wound in his scaly head, Shepard stated, that is a Turian. His name was Nilas. Well, if he is a Turian, then I know what his friend was. This time, the man turned back to Conan and questioned, there was another Turian? The other woman in their company gave her a nasty look when she said, yes. I think his name was Saren. Deceitful thing, managed to get Nilas there to lower his guard before shooting him in the back of the head. Clever though. But she didn't care, she was only going to give credit where credit was due. Furthermore, there was no valid basis to withhold it because she had nothing personal against the Turian. For now, she was just trying to survive. Shepard inquired, can you show us which way he went, and Conan gestured to her right. She let her hand down when Shepard had looked and spoke simply, he ran off down that way, towards this spaceport, or whatever it was the locals called it. Conan said, never assume a shinobi is unarmed, Commander. It could cost you your life. Shepard went on, I know you're unarmed, but we could use your help, Conan. Is that a threat? No, it's advice. According to Conan, only for now. I suspect there was a reason why he fled that way, and I intend on learning more. She questioned, so then, will you help us?